To economy now, where a new report says Israelis are growing increasingly poorer. According to the National Insurance Institute's annual poverty report, there were 1.95 million poor people living in Israel in 2021. That's up from 1.87 million people the previous year. So what's gone wrong? To answer, we're joined by Dr. Alex Coman, a value creation expert with the Academic College of Tel Aviv-Jaffa. Dr. Coman, thanks for being with us. What does it mean when we say that nearly 2 million Israelis are living under the poverty line?
Well, it means we define a line, if the income is under that level, it means that families have difficulty sustaining themselves. But we need to have two caveats when we're talking about Israel. And that's because we have two populations that do not work out of choice. One population is Hasidic Jews, where the women usually work, and they work very hard, and the men study. So they are almost, by definition, under the poverty line. And the other population is Arab women, many of which do not work. That's the first caveat. Populations that choose not to be part of the labor body. And the other point that we need to take into account is that we also have a significant Black economy, which means people out of these communities who do work, but do not report that to the authorities. So as a result, you might sometimes see families where the expense level is higher than the income.
So what you're saying is that this doesn't have much of an effect on the average Israeli citizen?
Well, I think that in Israel, the average Israeli unemployment is quite low. It was around 3%, which is dramatically lower. In fact, many economists consider it too low because they want people to be nervous, to be more competitive. So 3% is considered a low level. But I think the major pain point is people who do work and still their income is not sufficient for their own sustenance. That's the most painful population.
What kind of people are we talking about here? Is that families or elderly people? What does that look like?
It can be elderly people. In particular, a subgroup in that is Holocaust survivors, for instance. So we're talking about people who are elderly, who get what the government is giving them, which is dramatically insufficient. It's weird because the government office, which was in charge of that, said that they could not locate them because they were so sneaky that they could not be located and helped to survive, which is an absurd argument. And it is people working in jobs such as in supermarkets or in industry and making a low income. That would be equivalent in the US to people working at a McDonald's or at Amazon, things like that. And their income level makes it difficult. Particularly, you mentioned elderly people who need to buy medicine. It's true that in Israel, medicine is relatively cheap, but still they need, the worst case is when they need to decide between food and their medicine.
So what measures can be taken to prevent this epidemic of people living in poverty, like you said, the elderly and Holocaust survivors? And is the government doing anything about it?
Well, the government is doing more for the Hasidic Jews because they are a very significant power in the coalition. So they get very strong support just for going to the yeshiva and studying. And the government spends less attention to those weaker populations. We do have a clandestine support bodies that do help them by bringing food to their houses, bringing clothes, but that's not an established government operation. It's just people who are kind enough to help them. And the government right now, unfortunately, it's not at the top of its priorities.
Very unfortunate indeed. Dr. Alex Coman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure.